Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for being here and welcome to everyone who's joining us online. I can't jump into this session without acknowledging and thanking Auntie Joan Bell for her very generous, her very gracious and her very moving welcome to country. And I too would like to acknowledge that we are here today on the unceded lands of the Gadigal people in the Eora Nation, where I have the privilege myself of living and working, and I pay my respects to those elders, both here in Gadigal and Eora, and our First Nations elders in Australia. And I also, and elsewhere, and today I think it's very important to acknowledge traditional owners everywhere who've been displaced by colonial regimes. I would also like to extend those respects to any First Nations people who are here in the room with us today. And with that said, I'd now like to start by introducing the focus of this particular session, after which point I will turn to our witnesses who are going to share their testimony with us this morning. So the first session today has been called Homes as a Foundation of Life, and it features evidence from families experiencing housing stress and at risk of homelessness, including single parent families and women escaping violence. It will highlight the impact on children and families of unstable housing. Now, each of our speakers have 5 minutes to share their opening remarks with us, followed by some questions by Commissioners, Doug and myself, which will be based on what you've shared in your submissions and with us here today. At the conclusion of this session, I'll summarise some of what we've heard and draw us to a close. But before we jump in, I really, truly want to acknowledge and thank all of our speakers for being here today. And I want to take the opportunity to remind our participants that some of the topics covered may be heavy, that we can take a break at any time. And of course, if you need to stop or step out of the room, please do feel free to do so. And of course, that extends to people here in the room as well. So, look, it's my great privilege to introduce our first speaker this morning, Rachel. Thank you.
This one. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for allowing me to speak my truth. It's very hard sometimes in society how we hear people's stories and politicians speak for us, but we have a voice. You know, some of us want to speak out, but often the truth is not heard. So my journey started, I grew up in England, in Liverpool. I was born in Birmingham, and a bit of a trigger warning, but my birth mother was raped, and I was the result of that rape. And so I was born into homelessness, and I was put in an orphanage for the first 2 years of my life. And then I was adopted at about 2.5. That part of my life I don't really remember, but what I do know is I always felt like I didn't belong, that there was something different about me. And so I grew up in a very stable family and had a great mum and dad and adopted brother, and life went on quite easily as a child. And I think that foundation for children is so important to help them get through mental health issues. If you've got an education and all these things that a lot of us take for granted, so many kids, it's a roller coaster. And if you don't have that stability of a home, it's very, very difficult. So I didn't really know too much about domestic violence or homelessness. Growing up in Liverpool, obviously, it was a very, as you know, coming from Scotland, you know, it was a lot of poverty, but I was middle class, so I would see homeless people. I guess we understood it a lot more than over here because I was exposed to it, but I didn't really react to it. Until I was 33 years old, I had a young family. I'm from the Northern Beaches in Sydney. It's a very wealthy area. People don't want to acknowledge these social issues. You know, they think, oh, let's not build a train line. We don't want those problems, but the problems exist everywhere. And no one is exempt from homelessness or domestic violence. There are no boundaries of class. You can have all the money in the world and you can go through crisis. So at 33 years old, my husband at the time had a mental breakdown and became psychotic. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. He isolated me. He said I couldn't tell anyone. He couldn't look after the children. He said he didn't want to be a father. I was reaching out desperately for mental health support, couldn't wrangle the numbers, couldn't find any help. It spiraled out of control over 9 months and became very dangerous for me and the children, to the point that my friends were saying, you've got to get out. It became violent because, as we know from mental health, it can escalate pretty quickly. So we were put in a place of violence. I got an AVO, and then it came to the point where we obviously had to escape. I made him leave the home, so I stayed in the rental. But what happened was his name was on the lease, his name was on the bank account, his name was on the car. Within 24 hours, everything was cancelled. And I was notified by the real estate and everybody, you've got to leave. And I had nothing, and I had no access to my bank account because I was a loving wife, and I didn't know, I wasn't independent like that. I just relied on the man to take over things. So all these people weren't on my side. They were pushing me out, and I had nothing. And I rang all the numbers that people in my community suggested, and everyone said, well, we can't help you. Just go in your car. There's a 20-year wait for housing. So that was the first incident. We were homeless. We ended up moving in with a friend. I won international relocation back to the UK, but the Australian government put me on a 2-year wait over here till my daughter went to high school. In that time, we lived with a family with their 3 kids. That was really, really stressful, as you can imagine, a mum and dad basically parenting me with my 3 children. We were grateful for the accommodation, but it was really, really stressful. We gave up every single item of furniture in our house. We had to give it away. I lost my dignity. I lost my identity. The people in the school community didn't want to associate us because the police were there all the time. And even though the police weren't there because of me, oh, it's a bit tricky to stay away from that family. My children became isolated. My children became bullied. Their mental health went downhill. I also have a child with a disability, and even that wasn't enough for me to get housing or help. So I've been fighting this song and dance. I advocate, I public speak about it, but I still haven't resolved it myself. We got a rental, we got housing subsidy. Eventually, after 7 years, I lived in a granny flat. That again was traumatic, living in somebody else's house with them kind of telling us what to do. We were thankful for it, but I felt like I constantly had to thank people for helping us because they're like, we're helping you. Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to go to IKEA and pick a kitchen and pick wallpaper and pick something. I've never had that dream, the dream that every woman wants to have of planning what I like in a home, planning that my children can have their bedroom and stability for life. I didn't get that. So then we finally moved to a rental, finally had a house. We had no furniture. We had to, Vinnie's, fortunately, thank God for Vinnie's, they provided it all for us. We'd been sleeping on foam mattresses for a year. We got proper beds. We're finally stable. And then in the granny flat, go back, a tree fell on our house, so we were homeless again. Nothing. Instantly, 7 days, had to move out, had to put my son with his carer. So again, the song of dance of ringing the same services, there's nothing, still a 20-year wait. And also in my work, I go to social housing, and I would like to see social housing change because it is covering a majority of people now. And so I've gone to social housing where I honestly wouldn't want my children. I wouldn't want my children next to the ice addicts that I go and take food to in my work. And I think that we can have community and social housing scattered, not in these like old 80s ghettos that have been made. So many people now are facing this reality of homelessness, and where you get desperate. So at Christmas this year, My landlord, after 4 years, said she wanted to move back into her home. She also was facing a crisis. She needed to move back. She'd applied for multiple rentals, needed to move back. Of course, I had to move, but it was hard for me. 2 days after that, I got diagnosed with a tumor. They had to operate immediately. I've already gone through cancer, through the homelessness crisis. It was like another trauma. Like, what am I meant to do? So I had to put the real estate agent on the side and put my health first and go and have the operation. I was told that I might lose my leg. It might be a sarcoma. I might not live for 6 months. They didn't know until they did the operation. And in all this, I haven't seen my family for 7 years because I can't afford to get back to the UK to see my parents. My kids haven't had a holiday. You know, education's been hard, but we've had support. But this song and dance of now we've moved into another rental, we've got 1 year on this rental, what is going to happen after that rental? And I've been pushing and shouting, but nobody wants to listen. It is a whisper for us women. It is a whisper for homeless men. It is a whisper because the government and people are not listening. And certainly in my community, there are a minority of people that care, but there's not a majority of people that act. They are all running their own race because they're okay. Whereas I'm a person that, even though I'm going through this roller coaster trying to pull 3 children with me, of never knowing where we're going to live, where we're going to be, I am trying to speak out and say, you matter, the community matters, and we're all in this together, and we need to build houses and build a home for everybody because everybody is valuable in our community. And together, if we speak up and acknowledge every situation is different, I believe eventually somebody will listen. So thank you for this opportunity today.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for generously sharing that with us. Extremely insightful and helpful for us. We will, as I said before, move to some questions after we've had the opportunity to hear from each of you. So now I'd like to welcome and thank Taylor for your submission.
Hi, thank you. I'm Tali, and I am here to speak about being a child of domestic and family violence and experiencing homelessness. My homelessness didn't happen as a child, but I did move a lot of times, and that had a huge impact. So you're experiencing domestic family violence. You don't have people around you that are stable because your home base is constantly changing. We got moved to some places that were very scary as a child. It's places that we still send children to, and we think it's acceptable to do. And I think when we're actually considering the whole of the housing system, we need to consider the impacts on children. We need to understand, what does domestic and family violence do to a child? Because they are not witnesses of it, they are experiencing it in the moment. And for too long, we've been saying they're just bystanders in a situation. When you are witnessing it, you are living it. When you are in it, you also have it directed at you. So either way, you're surrounded and you're being a victim of domestic and family violence. But that does not have to define your life. And I think this is what we often do. We often look at data and say, just because you're a child of domestic and family violence, you're going to experience it. That puts the blame on the victim, because what we're not saying is perpetrators seek out people. They learn their love language, they learn what they need, and they entice them in. It's when we know and aware as a society of what's happening that we will actually be able to stop the perpetrators from doing the actions. And I think we need to think about that in terms of homelessness too, because we blame people who are experiencing homelessness. We say it's your fault. You didn't pull your boots up, and you didn't get your job, and you didn't do the things that you need to do. It has absolutely nothing to do with that. This is a systemic failure, and it happens constantly. And it happened to me as an adult when I left domestic and family violence. And I did not marry him because I was a child of domestic and family violence. I married him because no one around me believed me. When I was a child, no one around me believed me when I spoke up, because apparently children don't know what they're talking about. So we need to be thinking about What are people saying? Believing what they're saying, hearing, understanding, and responding to it, because that is not what we are doing. And we need to stop blaming people for their circumstances when we know we have a siloed system that means that people are experiencing domestic and family violence, disability, homelessness, health issues, multiple things, and the system does not work together to ensure that people are safe and to ensure that they have housing. And when we put people in housing, the housing system is not trauma-informed. The health system is not trauma-informed. Every system is not trauma-informed. We therefore compound the trauma they're experiencing, provide new trauma for them. So we're not providing safe spaces for people to live. We're not providing safe places for people to engage with systems. We need to really think about, what are we doing in this space? Are we really caring about the people that need this kind of support? Or are we actually thinking about what we need to do to solve it, to feel better, or to feel like we're the hero, or to feel like we've got the solutions? And that needs to be a co-design with people who have experienced it all the way through the system. And I think we need to be buying properties and building properties, and we need to save people's lives by providing housing. And we're not seeing it as a necessary human right. We're seeing it as something we can earn money from. And that is not a way we need to be considering housing. I don't mind if people have rental properties and earn money, but they don't need to have 30 of them. And we know politicians that have 30 of them, and they're therefore not wanting to change the system because it works for them. And we need to think about it as this is a necessary part of life. And people need to be able to live in a place. When people are in stable housing, they can rebuild their lives. They can actually find what they are good at. They can actually find what works for them. And I think we often tell people what they should be doing and how they should be doing it and what work they should be doing. And we have this middle class attitude that you can just change a job if you don't like it. If you don't have the money, you can't change a job if you don't like it. So I think we need to looking at a lot of the solutions that you mentioned, Doug, I think are really good options. We also need to looking at things like Amsterdam solutions, where you have permanent rental properties, UK solutions, where you actually have people who get incentives for renting to people who have low incomes. And we need to stop seeing people as the, worthy poor, or the worthy disabled, or the worthy domestic and family violence victims. There is no such thing. Everybody is worthy, everybody is valuable, and we do not consider people like that. If I was considered like that as a child, if I was listened to, if I was believed, maybe my life would be completely different. Maybe I wouldn't have even got half the disabilities that I have now. But we'll never know, because if I did get put into the system, we know the system is so dangerous, and there are multiple people that get abused in systems when they're taken out of families. So it needs to be a whole systemic change that is brought about to actually make people feel safe and to know that a home is a home, not a place to earn money. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tally. And now we turn to Lucy. Thank you, Lucy.
Hello. I'm going to speak quite rawly about my experience. So I am a mother of 2 teenage children, and I have been separated and divorced from my husband for 12 years. In that 12 years, 17 years I've been living in the inner west, and in that 12 years, the children and I have had to move around 7 to 8 times. Not always, but the majority of the time was because I could not afford the rent increase. Last year, 2 years ago, I signed a lease at $640 for a 3-bedroom apartment. This was affordable as I was the only income for the family. The end of the term was up, and the real estate agent came to me with a rent increase of $850 a week. This was over $200 a week more. and I had not had any increase in my salary. It was an extremely distressing moment. I went back to the real estate agent to try and negotiate, as you do, but it fell on deaf ears. I find myself looking within the area for a new rental and unfortunately was declined. It became so stressful that I went back to the real estate agent and said all I could afford was $750. Her reply was an eviction notice. I had 30 days. I did not have the immediate support family most people have. My support was my community, my kids, parents, friends, my friends. So it was an extremely distressing moment. I ended up sitting in my car thinking this is where we would be living. I didn't know what was going to happen to my things. And it was extremely distressing. I ended up finding a phone number which was linked to home. I called that number several times and could not get through. I finally got through, and a very kind lady listened to what I was going through and understood and got me in touch with an association who advocated for me. They wrote letters to the real estate agent to actually ask her to remove the eviction notice. Excuse me. And finally, the real estate agent said that I could stay until I found a new home, but I would have to pay $800 a week in rent. I didn't have $800 a week in rent. Anyhow, I still applied and applied. I had friends helping me. In the end, I had to start looking outside my community. I had to move away. But this was very distressing for me and the children because I didn't want to take them out of school. I have a child that's just finishing high school and I had one just starting. That was their community. That was their friends. It was their mental health. We ended up finding a place, but the only way I got the house was if a friend of mine went guarantor. Yet I had a healthy rental history of paying rent, but I was denied because I had one income and very little support. So we're there now and we're 6 months into our lease. We actually really like the place we live. We've made it our home. But I'm paying $825 a week in rent. I have a job, part-time, and I have 2 casual jobs. I'm working all the time. To say I'm tired it's hard. My kids see me when I come home and cook them dinner, and I sit and do some homework with them. And then the time I get to myself is when I'm asleep, because I'm up at 6 a.m. in the morning doing my casual job before my permanent job. Then I go home to my other job. 3 jobs. It's not sustainable. But I'm concerned at the way that the rent just keeps going up. I want to know, and I've done some research, why other states like the ACT, South Australia, can cap the rent so that the investor knows that they're still going to have growth, yet the tenant can sit there and go, gosh, I can be here for the next 3 years because I can afford the 10% increments in rent and know that there's stability. Why can't New South Wales do that? It's simple to me. Still creates growth, tenant has security. Anyway, so now I'm looking, I start to get worried now, 6 months into my lease, where am I going to be? I will have to start looking in about, 4 months. And my kids have got to move again. And also the cost of moving. You're forking out thousands of dollars. I mean, it was $1,700 I had to borrow from a friend to move last time. It's a lot of money. Anyway, that's my story. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Lucy. We really appreciate you taking the time actually out of your extraordinarily busy life to share that very, very important submission with us. And now if we can turn to Libby.
I remember putting my key into the door at the end of the day the last time we moved. I remember mistakenly feeling relieved that this was it. At last we might have some respite finally after a long physically and emotionally draining day and start to settle into this new place we could call home for a while. My partner and I were used to moving. We've had the bad luck of having had to move frequently due to owners selling or moving back in, change in family circumstances, rent increases, or ending leases with no grounds. This was our 6th move in 6.5 years. I remember saying in the cheeriest voice I could muster, "Here we are, home at last," and the questioning look that came from my from my 14-month-old son. I followed it up with, "Here, this is where we're staying now." I was not expecting the howl that followed, the sobs, all the little no's. His chest heaved as he kept repeating, "No home, home." We had tried our best to prepare him, but how do you prepare a 14-month-old when you don't understand it yourself? We'd recently signed a new lease on our old apartment. We had breathed a sigh of relief thinking we were safe another year. Then a call 2 months later came informing us that the owner was looking to urgently renovate and sell the apartment. The agent spoke about disruption after disruption of works, then inspections, painting pictures of trying to juggle nap times, routines, and privacy of our son while the owner attempted to sell. He offered help in finding a new place for us, something that would suit us better, explaining that the owner would appreciate it so much if we found a new place as quickly as we could. We got very lucky. Admittedly, these were still COVID times and demands for properties were lower, and we found a suitable place in the same area, still within our budget, but more, and as explained, the cost of moving is significant. I remember putting my key into the door at the, I remember saying, I lost my point.
It's all right, take your time.
We were told by the agent not to bother about the exit clean as the owner would be doing renovations and messing it up anyway. There'd been flooding during our tenancy as a pipe in the laundry sink was never attached properly and had come loose and flooded through the kitchen and even into the living room. We'd made emergency calls about it, had trusted the agent at the time. We did our own extensive cleanup but the floors were not fit for water damage and had been ruined in the process. When we left, they claimed there was no knowledge of the flooding or the floor damage, and that because we also hadn't cleaned the property upon our exit, they would be keeping our entire bond. We offered to go back and clean. They refused to let us back in. They just said that they were going to take the entire bond. We tried to fight it by taking it to tribunal, but we were warned by the free tenancy advocates in our area that it would be a hard fight as we didn't have written proof of it. We had trusted that the phone calls that we had made would be enough. We were told we should have claimed the bond before the agent did, something we hadn't gotten around to quick enough in all the stress of an unexpected move and the holiday season fast approaching. And we also felt like we were doing something kind for the owner who had said that they had to urgently sell. It was Christmas, and the emotional weight and stress of the fight seemed too hard, and we decided we had to let it go. On Christmas Day, I happened upon the new ad for our old apartment. It hit me like a punch in the gut. They were leasing an apartment, now at a higher rent, and with a new agent, but the same owner. Again, I made calls to tenants' rights advocates, sure this had to be illegal. I was told it was a legal loophole. If it had been the same agent advertising at a new price, they could have done something. But because the landlord had switched agents, it was circumventing the law. It took months for my son to settle into his new home, and this was somewhere still in the same area, his routines and support systems uninterrupted. But he has never forgotten being forced to move from his first home. He regularly asks me fearfully when we have to move again, and I hate not having an answer for him. The week his baby sister was born, we got a notice of a rental increase of $100. The agent said that the landlord was being kind, that he could have increased it more if he chose to, and we should be grateful. The agent refused to negotiate the price, nor the length of the lease, even if we included an additional rent increase in a year's time, just for the security of knowing we had a 2-year lease. We suspect, given how fast the emails were flying back to us, that this was coming directly from the agent rather than the owner. Suspicions backed by other cases we've heard of through friends and family of agents driving these conditions and increases, often rather than landlords themselves. The lease length, at least we were told specifically that the rental agency would never offer a lease longer than 12 months. Given the massive adjustment our son was already facing with the new addition to our family, we readjusted our budget and accepted the increase. This year, we were hit with another increase of $100 and are still more than 3 months after requesting one, waiting anxiously to sign a new lease. We searched for another property in our area when the rent increase came. There was absolutely nothing. Even if we somehow downsized and squeezed all 4 of us into a 1-bed apartment, there was nothing available in our area or the surrounding areas that would allow us to continue our routines, employment, and keep our support systems in place. We've cut back every possible way we can, but we know we can't do this again. When the next increase comes, we'll have to move. Everything will be thrown into upheaval, and we'll most likely have to leave Sydney and our families altogether. We can't fathom having to go through that kind of upheaval more than once in our young children's lives, and anywhere in Sydney holds that danger, that the prices will go up beyond what we can afford, that the availability of properties will disappear entirely, that the threat of homelessness looms ever present. I'm unbelievably sad and angry that this is our future, that we won't be able to raise our kids where we grew up, where we have built strong community connections that are already being affected, and other families that we know leave the area because they can't afford it any longer. That my kids will be moved away from grandparents and great-grandparents who treasure their time together, not to mention uncles, aunts, cousins around the same age. I wonder what Sydney will look like when most families cannot afford to live here any longer. My son sobbing, "No home, no home," echoes in my mind, haunting me.
Thank you so much, Libby. I know that was difficult for you to share, but it was such a privilege for us to listen to you, and so important to hear your story in your own words and speaking for the many, many families who are currently experiencing what you've described as well. And that gratitude goes to all of our 4 speakers this morning. Yeah, thank you. We are going to now open up for a few more questions. I'm going to invite my co-commissioner, Doug, to lead off. And it almost, I have to be frank with you, it's difficult to even ask you to share even more insights, given what you've already shared with us. And, you know, you're welcome to bat back any questions to the 2 of us, of course. But we will ask you some questions in the spirit of further putting forward, you know, some of the experiences that you've endured, but also to help illuminate some of the solutions that we know, you know, particularly as Tali told us, I think very movingly, that that any of these solutions to housing issues need to be co-designed with people who are experiencing them, not only because that will make the solutions more effective, but also recognising the real expertise that the 4 of you have in this space. So with that, Doug, can I invite you to ask some questions?
Thanks, Nicole. And could I just say to everyone here today, what a terrific group of women, smart, articulate, brave. And it really is, you know, an eye-opener, and I wish more and more people could see what this free market, you know, anything goes housing situation is delivering. Rachel, you kicked off and you indicated that about dignity and identity. That really sort of struck home to me because these are all dignified women, and yet housing is stripping you of your dignity. How, I mean, it's easy, how do we deal with that? I'm concerned about nobody seems to be getting the support you need. How difficult was it to get support?
So the first time when I was going through domestic violence over 5 years, there was no support. Didn't matter what number I rang. I got support obviously from a women's refuge, but again, they're fighting for housing. You know, their funding's actually been recently cut. So they struggle in themselves. My children, I've got 3 children, and they got support through Dalwood Spilstead, my son with a disability. Their funding's been cut recently. They're trying to close them down. So all these places that actually have helped young children, the money's not going into them and the doors are becoming shut. So, you know, you were talking about the cost. I moved recently. It cost me $17,000 to move house. My rent is $1,250 a week. It is a nightmare. It has gone up $400 a week. I get subsidy, but I have begged and borrowed from all sorts of people to maintain that. And, you know, it's that constant lack of identity. Who am I as a woman? Who are my children? I'm trying to build them up. I had a secure childhood. My kids haven't. They've had mental health issues. Recently, just before we moved, my daughter OD'd. You know, as a mother, that's just like one of the worst things you can go through. And now, you know, trying to get her stable, but this is a result from years of trauma and trauma that people don't listen to. And how do I stabilize that? So as they turn into adults, you know, the cost of uni for my daughter in uni now, how do we maintain those HECS debts? All this piles on and their mental health is so vulnerable. So I guess for me, your question about dignity is I felt like you, my community's helped me. I don't have one single family member in Australia. I just have me and my 3 children. So we don't have aunties, cousins, we have nobody to turn to. So my community has been everything for me to fight to stay. And it has been a shit fight to stay. Because as you can imagine, the rent's crazy. And people go, if you can't afford to move here, go away, go out west. Everybody wants all the poor people to go out west. Well, everybody's basically poor at the moment and the West can't handle it, you know? So it's that kind of thing of my identity. Why should my identity be valued based on my bank account? You know, where is the worth and self-respect in this message of stop the violence, stop homelessness, all this stuff we see on the TV and all these shows? And my mind, while I sit there, goes, that's great, they're all doing that, but nobody really cares for the people that are going through it. Because, you know, I'm 10 years in front of you, you know, and you've got little ones, and you're going through that now, and you've gone through that, and it's a cycle of life. And still, in all this time, if we put all these years together, not one thing has changed. So we're speaking out, I believe, for everybody that's going to follow us. But yes, I have hope for my children. But to be honest, there isn't much hope based on what we can see right now.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah. So Tally, you indicated that one of the problems you had was people believing you, people understanding you, and people acting to support you. Do you have any examples where there has been support?
Turn your mic on, Doug.
Oh, sorry. That better? Right. I'm sure Tally heard me.
I did.
Yeah. So is there any, could you give me a quick example of people who have supported and how you got support and how frustrating it is when you can't get support?
I think one of the hardest things when you can't get support is when you've been through trauma, it reinforces the trauma. It reinforces the messages that you get all of your life. And it's very hard to fight against that. So it usually wasn't a big thing that was about support. It was usually one small comment. Like, I remember I wanted to join in something and I was too scared as a little girl to say, I really want to play cricket. And this person saw that I wanted to, just by my whole body wanting to do it, and went and said to the group, can she bat? And it was that moment that that person saw, heard, and acted that made the difference. It was the person who said to me, I can see you can't pay this bill. I'm going to pay it for you. And there's no condition on it. And I think what we do is we give help, but we do it with conditions. Like all the welfare stuff it's because you're vulnerable, which is a created vulnerability by mankind, basically. And I'm going to say mankind intentionally, because we want to keep people small. Because if we keep people small, we can't actually, we feel better about ourselves because we can look after someone or we can provide something. But we've failed to actually understand that when we give even the smallest, like I remember being in a shop and smiling at a woman when she walked past. I didn't even realize I did it. I just did it. And she stopped me and she said to me, you are the only person that has seen me today. And when we start seeing people as boxes, as people that don't have faces, and we often talk about people in such horrific ways, we do not look at the fact that these are human beings that have been through trauma, and trauma impacts greatly. And we have behaviours that come out of trauma. So I think it's hard to say exactly one thing because there wasn't, but when I found a service that helped me, that was enormously, like that was amazing. When an ambulance officer said, when I said to him when I was 7, he didn't hurt himself by falling, he threw something. And that's how he hurt himself. And this ambulance officer, I remember him still to this day, said, that's why we're going to take him away to cool off. Now, that didn't solve anything. It didn't interact anyway. But he saw and heard me in that moment. And if we really listen to kids and we really believe them, because we have this attitude that kids make up things. Kids don't make up things. They're telling you the truth by their behaviour, their words, their actions. You know, we need to stop and listen to what that is. And then we can make a profound difference.
So Lucy, you know, what a hard-working, dedicated woman you are. Given that you've had to move 7 or 8 times, what is that doing to your kids?
Well, it's quite upsetting for them because we get into a new home, we get settled after a couple of months, and then we have to move again. So it's very unsettling for them. I have been out of my own doing. I've made sure that I've been able to at least keep them in the same school. I thought that was really important for their mental health. But it's not only like I've had to, over the years, I've had 2 bedrooms where I've had to share a bedroom with my daughter. It's only in recent times, because I have a son who's 17 and I have a 13-year-old daughter, that they've had to have separate bedrooms. But also, can I just make a point about support? So when this happened to me last year, I also was unemployed, which was very difficult because I've always had a job, and I was on welfare. And so this opened doors I didn't know about. And I was quite surprised about some of the support I could get. And I ended up being on a priority housing wait list, which was about 5 years. And I thought, 5 years. And then if you look at the non-priority, it is 10 years plus. anything can happen in 10 years. And so I was on this list, but then I got a job. Good on me. Felt good about that. But guess what? Now I'm off the list. This makes me upset because I'm still in the same position. I still have 2 children. I still got to put meals on the table. 80 to 90% of my income goes to the rent alone. I am visiting, I can't think of the name of them now, but, you know, food banks. That's where I get most of my groceries from, and I'm very grateful for that. But this is all new. And, you know, I was told by the school that I was entitled to a grant for my son finishing the last 2 years of school. But now that I'm off the housing list, I'm not entitled to that. I had all my hopes up for this $1,000, but I'm not entitled to it now because I'm not on a priority wait list for housing, because I got myself together and got myself a house and I'm paying the rent. So, you know, look, you make sacrifices as a mother, you do. And my children are everything to me, and I will do anything for them to make sure that they have what they need. But it's tough out there and it's real. And it just needs, just when you get to that point where you got somewhere, suddenly the support drops off.
Yeah. Just to add to the effect on children, having had bonds taken for things that we didn't do, the anxiety there then, particularly when you have small children, but even with older children, you don't want to put things up on the walls because you're worried about the damage that might do, and then they might take $500 for a tiny scratch. You know, it happens, you see it all the time, that they, you know, you worry about your children playing, you know, with a metal car on the floorboards because that might scratch it, and then you'll have to pay for something, you know, damage. All of those tiny things end up in your mind, and it does affect the way that you parent, and it does affect how the children feel about that being their home. My son knows now, like he will say, but this isn't ours. We can't do that because this isn't ours. And growing up in that kind of environment is really sad. I think, you know, kids should be able to express themselves and feel like that they can put things up on the walls, they can put stickers up, they can paint, they can do whatever that they need to do to learn and to grow, and to limit that because it's not yours is just an awful thing to have to consider.
Yeah, sure.
We moved in, 4 weeks ago, and the first week we had a man at my daughter's window at 6:30 a.m. stare into the window, and she's only 17. And obviously I called the police. But the other thing is the back door, since we've moved in, so we're paying high rents, the back door doesn't shut. So we have to sleep with the back door shut and no security. And I've rang the real estate, like I emailed them to let them know, but they still haven't sent anyone around. But I'm scared to constantly ring, because the moment you ring, you know, in a few months' time, when they say we can stay or go, if you become a problem, you don't really want to say anything. So it's freezing, the back door's open, but also, you know, in the area, apparently there's a man that's hanging around at 6 a.m. But what do you do? And I just want to add, you feel like you're constantly persecuted for asking, even though we're paying high amounts of rents. And I've done the opposite from you. I was working, but I realized the only way to keep a roof over my head was to stay in poverty, because I get the subsidy. And it's not for lack of wanting to work, but I don't want my children homeless again after the 4th time it's happened. So I've done the reverse and gone, I don't have a choice, because otherwise we're out on the street. So, you know, perfectly good women giving up careers because we don't have a choice.
So the system is forcing you.
It's to stay in poverty. Yeah, it's to stay in poverty. You don't have a choice. And, you know, of course, that takes away rights for holidays and things that you would do with your kids, obviously. But I mean, we live a very simple life. We're very routine. And unfortunately, my children got subsidies to go to a good school. because they were getting bullied in the public system. So we got my son into a disability school and my other two children just in the final years of their schooling. But again, it's that thing, you've got children then, I would say my kids through the trauma, their mental health now is hit peak. It has been even worse than when they were younger. And so now I'm going ticking time bomb. They're going to turn, one's turned 18, one's turning 18 soon. She's been in hospital constantly. I'm trying to keep her alive. We're going to be homeless. What do? The time bomb's going where, you know, I won't get the single parent thing. I've got a disabled son. What am I meant to do? Say to my kids, see you later. And then you've got the housing subsidy people saying, oh, well, you kids can move out. Do you ever see a rich person being told the minute their kid turns 18, your kids have got to leave now? My friends that are wealthy, their uni fees get paid, their kids don't pay rent, they have all this help from their parents. I don't even have a blanket of foundation other than love to give my kids, but it's this constant punishment because we're poor.
I was just going to add, the problem with things like, so I'm on a disability pension. I can't earn a particular amount of money over that because I'll start to lose my pension. So I'm constantly in concern, as if I lose my pension, then I can't afford the rent and I won't be able to stay in housing. So I think those kind of things, all those factors work together to keep people stuck. And it's not a stuck because you don't want to do it. It's a stuck because the system is a power and control system. And so it puts this pressure on people that you've got to follow the system the way we want you to follow it, and there's no flexibility in it. And so we need to look at allowing people to earn more money when they've got benefits or when they're in housing, and find ways to be flexible within that rather than rigid systems.
Thank you so much. I am mindful of time. There is one question I wanted to put to you, and anyone actually is welcome, or all of you, to answer it. And that is around the government's preferred solution at the moment, which we hear is about more supply, not necessarily supply that is built or funded by government, but an aspiration to increase homes in the private rental sector. I'm just interested in a reaction from you. Do you think that if there was more house building of private rental dwellings, would that hit the types of circumstances that you're describing?
I don't think so. Again, I'm from the Northern Beaches. Their plan is to get rid of all the social housing and move it out west. Their plan is to put affordable housing in, but it will not be affordable housing for the people that need it. They'll do deals with investors. So I don't think it's going to be for people like us. It will be a clever system that looks to the public. We're getting rid of all the social housing. We're going to build high rises and put in new town centres, but it's not going to be for the people that need it. So I don't think it will make any difference from women escaping violence to people on the pension to people in social housing. It's just going to look good and tick a box. So for me, when I see all these things spoken about, I just go, well, looks good again. But, you know, unless they target capping rents and putting long-term rentals in place and actually hitting landlords with consequences, because we're being treated like criminals and we're terrified. And going through domestic violence, I can tell you what followed after domestic violence without my ex-husband in my life was probably even worse. And it's been constantly the aggressive approach of the system, not landlords, but the system that we're in, of this constantly keep them in poverty, keep them silent, don't let them speak, keep controlling them. Education doesn't talk to community, community doesn't talk to state, state doesn't talk to federal. Lack of communication. These people that work in housing subsidy and these support systems, they're not even trained in community services, so they don't even understand what someone like us has gone through. So when you go to them for help, they're like, oh, we've got no one in the office, we can't help you, we're very understaffed. You ring Centrelink, it's a joke. You know, the robot answers, they say call back, go in, you go into Service New South Wales, sorry, we're not trained to do that, you're going to have to ring back at 8 o'clock. But actually the robot's made an error, your payment's been stopped because they think your daughter's left school, she hasn't left school, 6 months you go without pay, then you can't pay rent. And it is a cycle of abuse that constantly continually happens.
So Rachel, can I just ask quickly, is this your local council that's pushing this?
So my council, Northern Beaches Council, had a policy. So I started a group last year called Housing Affordability. They had a policy in 2017 to do affordable housing. It is now 2024 and they have not done one thing. Looks good on paper, looks like they're doing it. Obviously, the Northern Beaches doesn't want any affordable housing or development because we want to protect our, Palm Beach way of life. But the reality is all these hardworking people that work in restaurants, that clean their bums in hospitals, the police stations, the nurses, the teachers, all of these people are falling into the hole of homelessness. So where's the respect for them,
I can see Libby.
Sorry,
wants-
without a cap on rent increases, even and I think also things like Airbnb are a massive problem because you just see it moving out. It's continuing to be a problem, but that problem is just being shifted. So you can't afford to live in the eastern suburbs, they're all Airbnbs. Then you can't afford to live in the inner west. So that problem's then moved out to the west. And that problem hasn't gone. There's still the same amount of people and not enough property and rent increases that are not capped. And as those rent increases are becoming impossible in the west, then where do we go? We have to leave Sydney. It's just, I don't understand how there's going to be a future. And then even then you hear it from Brisbane. I've heard people saying, oh, the rents have gone up here because people are coming from Sydney. So we're just shifting the problem and it's not going to be solved unless there's a cap.
And I think we need a multi-pronged approach. I think the problem is we go, this is the solution and this is what we're going to do. And when we build them where people don't want to live or can't live or aren't around any of their supports. So I think there's not a problem with wanting to build as long as it is properly done, as long as it's regulated. I think there was a build in Glebe, I think it was, where they were supposed to build affordable housing for low-income people. And I think it ended up being not what they'd said they'd do, and what they provide is these tiny little boxes for people to live in. So I think we need to have a broad attitude to housing solutions and not just go, this is going to solve the problem. And when we make those properties, they need to be made with people who are going to live in them. They need to be accessible. They need to be culturally safe. They need to be safe for women leaving domestic and family violence. And we need to actually do considered properties rather than just we're just going to build this or we're going to leave that for the developer to decide. And we need to regulate it properly. And I think if we do that and we bring all of the different options of rental things, tax, we look at other solutions that are around the world as well and bring those in. And when we consider, I think we have to take it off being something that we earn money from and start being a thing we provide as a necessity that we can potentially earn some money from, because the properties aren't maintained. They're also like the rental properties. There's a lot of money paid. The rents go up all the time. So we need to restrict the things that need to be restricted. We also need to bring back, I think, the rent to buy system that used to be available so people can actually have a chance to get into stable housing.
I'm actually getting some signals from the organisers that we are going to wrap it. But Tali, Rachel, Lucy and Libby, I want to thank you once again. I want to reinforce that we are still able to receive additional submissions. So if there is anything else that you'd like to add, it will certainly inform our final report. I would, though, just like to take a moment to reflect a little bit on what we've heard. Look, and it's impossible, obviously, to summarise it in half a minute or so, but the four of you have very movingly shown us how housing is impacting people across all walks of life, that the support mechanisms that we would expect perhaps a nation like Australia to have in place are failing, not available. We've heard very profoundly the impacts of the lack of having access to an affordable, secure, stable private rental or social rental housing system is having on families, on children in particular, but also on your own ability to maintain those important social networks and participate in, economic activity as well. We've heard very convincingly about the need for real solutions, but solutions that are also co-designed with people who have lived experience and also the types of expertise that you bring to the table. So I thank you so much for kicking off this People's Commission on the housing crisis for us this morning. Thank the other people in the room, and let you all know that the next session on shaping the futures of young people and the role of housing in that is going to begin here at 12 o'clock. Thank you all once again.
Well done.